Hi there and welcome to Hearthside. My name is Michelle. I am the author on this blog. It's been a while. I'm working on some bigger stuff that's just not quite where I want it to be yet. In addition, I had COVID at the beginning of the month and my immunity's taken a real hit, so December's been difficult for me. So yeah, I hope you guys are having a good Yuletide so far. The topic that I wanted to talk about today is the story cycle around Baldr's death and the binding of Loki. And specifically, I find Snorri's version to not make sense to me. I know I've alluded to this previously in some different posts. If you're looking for information on whether or not Loki is worshipful, that's not what this post is about. Go look elsewhere or make your own decision on that one. This is strictly me looking at the lore and not really making sense of the story, or trying to make sense of the story, I guess. Because to me, it doesn't really make sense with Loki's character up to this point. All the other story cycles, Loki's pretty much a trickster figure who makes mistakes, then finds a way to set them right. This story doesn't fit that pattern, and honestly, murder is quite a big crime compared to like cutting off someone's hair, so that seems like it doesn't fit Loki's character. So I don't know how familiar all of you are with this particular story cycle, so I'm just going to summarize bits and then talk about them. And yeah, I'm mostly pulling from Snorri. I'm also pulling from the poetic Edda and Gesta Danorum, which is the history of the Danes. I have included links to where you can find those online for free, because I like to try to give you free copies of historical text where possible, because otherwise you're spending a lot on books. Of course, if it's a modern book, I would hope that you support the author if they are someone who should be supported. So the way this story starts, Baldr has a dream. He is going to die. It's not clear how he's going to die. At this point, Odin goes to ask the sorceress more about this. Frigg asks everything in all 9 worlds to vow not to harm Baldr. Well, almost everything. She thinks that Mistletoe's too young to hold an oath, and also that Mistletoe's too small to be a threat, and doesn't ask Mistletoe. At this point, they return to Asgard, and a strange woman appears at Frigg's hall. This, in Snorri's version, is Loki in disguise. There's not really too much reason to question this particular detail. And the conversation that takes place leads to Loki finding out about Mistletoe being able to harm Baldr. Then there's this contest going on among the gods to try to hurt Baldr, because nothing will hurt Baldr, and the gods think this is funny. Hodor, who is Baldr's brother, is unable to participate because Hodor is blind and feels a bit left out. So it's said that Loki guides Hodor's hand with the mistletoe dart, which leads to the death of Baldr. Now, it seems like in Snorri's version that this was very much Loki's idea. Loki's the one who is guiding Hodor's hand, and that Loki fashioned the darts themselves. But I will get into, after I've sort of gone through the rest of the story arc, as to why I think that may or may not be true. Just a second. I may have a few interruptions. I'm in the parlor and my cat is going in and out, so I will be right back. All right, sorry about that. It may happen a couple more times just because it is that time of day. So then what happens next is that Hermod visits the underworld where Baldr and Nanna are, because Nanna has killed herself out of grief. Hel agrees to release Baldr and Nanna if everything in the world will weep for Baldr's death. So the gods go around, and everything does agree, except for this giantess named Thok. The name means thanks. I don't really see how that's relevant to the story, but just an interesting fact. At least I can't find any relevance to the story. Maybe someone else will. Snorri writes that men believe Thok is also Loki in disguise, but I'm a little bit more likely to question that particular detail as we go along. At this point, the story begins to diverge a little bit. And in Snorri's account, the gods realize Loki is to blame for Baldr's death and continued internment within Helheim. So Loki flees to the house with the 4 doors to the 4 directions, where they hide and they're fishing for their food. And through one of the doors is able to see the gods coming. Then Loki disguises themselves as a salmon to hide in the water there from the gods. They eventually realize that that's where Loki is because of a fishing net that's in the fire. And Thor is able to retrieve Loki out of the water. At this point, Loki is taken to the cave in Midgard where they are bound. So that's the story in Snorri's version, but there's another version within the poetic Edda where something else happens first. And that's that the gods have a feast at Aegir's Hall, which is to mourn Baldr. And at this feast, Loki slays one of Aegir's servants. I don't think I'm pronouncing that name right, but I am feeling lazy at the moment, so I'm not going to try to do better. Yeah, just deal with that. Anyways, so Loki slays this servant and is sent out of the hall. But Loki returns angrily because Odin had vowed that Loki would always be welcome to drink at the table with him. And Loki reminds Odin of this promise, and so a cup is brought for Loki, a seat is found. Loki refuses to actually sit, starts insulting the gods in flyting, which is a historical way of fighting with words, which was actually part of the culture. However, Loki's taking this definitely too far, to the point that when Thor comes in, Thor threatens to end Loki and Loki flees. At this point, it catches up to the story that Snorri was talking about, where Loki runs to the house with the 4 doors. And the same thing happens with the salmon, and then Loki's binding. So this is why I kind of question Snorri's story. It's missing this whole part of the story arc. And what I'm wondering is, we know for sure Loki was going to be bound. The sorceress predicted that this would happen. But the sorceress did not say why Loki was going to be bound. And the question is, was Loki bound because of their role within Baldr's death? Or was Loki bound because they were a terrible guest and killed a servant and then insulted everyone present at Aegir's Hall, because that would make more sense with their character, and it would be definitely like overstepping a boundary within that historical culture that would definitely anger quite a few people. So, that to me would be what would make most sense. But then we have the question of, did Loki actually kill Baldr, or were they only part of that death in another way? And Snorri makes it seem like Loki was the perpetrator. Hodor was just an unwilling victim because of his blindness. But if we look at Gesta Danorum, there is a story about Hothrus and Baldrus fighting for love. In this case, the love of Nanna, but the names get kind of mixed up in this one because obviously Nanna is Baldr's wife, but in this story, that's not what seems to be happening. It's like more like it's going to be Hodor's wife. So this story, they're fighting for love, basically. And this is actually a fairly common story within cultures around the world, just as the trickster figure is very common in cultures around the world. Having two brothers representing the light and the darkness who are trapped in some sort of fight in which one slays the other. This is a very common story. And to me, it makes more sense now. What is Loki's involvement? We know for sure Loki knew Mistletoe would kill Baldr. How does Hodor find out about this? Hodor finds out from Loki. And there's nowhere where it really says how this would happen in Gesta Danorum. And there's just not enough accounts of this. But to me, if you're connecting the dots, Loki, as a trickster figure, quite often gets into trouble somehow, is forced to do something like bring Idun out of Asgard, etc., to save themselves. And this seems to be a very common theme within Loki's stories, so perhaps something similar happened where Loki found themselves in a bad spot. Hodor wanted information on how to kill Baldr. This information might have slipped, so Loki is responsible for Baldr's death in that Loki gave that information. Now, is Hodor actually blind? Maybe. This might be some sort of a metaphor because Hodor is associated with darkness and night, or is perhaps blind to the story and what is going on, because Baldr's death is fated. It is predicted by Baldr's dream, by the dream or vision that Frigg has, and the sorceress also confirms that Hel is making a place for Baldr. So we know that Baldr's death is fated, and the reality is that as much as the gods are fighting against Baldr's death, even the gods can't escape their fates. Odin's always trying to make things better to escape some of his fate at Ragnarok, with limited success. Again, Odin's trying to interfere with Baldr's death, not successfully. Interestingly, Frigg is trying to, because Frigg herself has seen that Baldr's going to die, although not how. And Frigg is also trying to change fate, which to me is a very interesting element because she has had this vision. She knows what's going to happen, but I guess the love of a mother, of course. We want the best for our children, and she feels the need to try to prevent this. Loki's also bound by fate. It has been predicted that Loki is going to be bound until Ragnarok. He doesn't say why this happens, but both Baldr and Loki are bound by fate. So not all of Loki's actions are their own in this case, because they have to result in Baldr's death. They have to result in Loki eventually being bound. So yeah, just sort of my hot take on this, I suppose, that I don't think that Loki is the character that Snorri is trying to make them. And the reason for that is that it doesn't fit with any of the other stories. I think Snorri was trying to make it maybe fit more with like a Revelations kind of story. And there are inconsistencies in Snorri's telling of the story beyond the ones that I've already mentioned. For example, at Loki's binding, then Snorri says Loki's sons are named Nari or Narfi and Vali, which doesn't make any sense because we know that Vali is Odin's son with Rindr, who avenges Baldr's death. So that there would be two Valis this close together in the story arc does not make very much sense, especially since they're from different parentage. Like within the culture, you might name people in the same family line with similar names, but they are not related, so this doesn't make any sense. Other scholars have suggested that instead of Vali, it was supposed to be Vili. Again, that doesn't make sense because we know that Vili is one of Odin's brothers. So the only translation that makes sense to me is the Ursula Drunk's translation, in which case Nari and Narfi are the two brothers. Instead of Nari or Narfi, the two brothers are Nari and Narfi. And this makes sense because we've already seen examples where siblings have similar names like that, like Freyr and Freya. In addition, the name Nari means corpse, which alludes to his fate about being killed by his brother. So that's another inconsistency within the Snorri story, which makes me question what actually is going on there and Snorri's motivations or Snorri's understanding of what was going on there. So yeah, I hope that you got something from that. You can add your comments here or on my Instagram. I don't allow comments on my blog because I like to leave a layer of separation. I kind of consider YouTube the Wild West, so have at her if you feel like it. And I will see you next time.